Are you ready to start?
I'm ready. I'm born ready. I watch all your videos, so I know exactly what you're going to say off the top. You're going to say, "Welcome to my show." Now I'm welcoming my next guest. If you want to just say a few words about yourself, so I've come prepared. I'm ready to
All
go.
right, go for it and say a few words about yourself, James.
All right, there we go. Well, I'm James Lynch. I'm a freelance MMA journalist. I used to be the senior MMA news editor at The Score, but they eliminated the position about 2 weeks ago. So now I'm back to working full time as a freelancer, doing a lot of interviews and video content and all that. More importantly, I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for accepting. First question, why did you accept to work in the MMA industry? That's the first one. Also, with the first one goes, when did you start? When did you pick MMA as your choice?
So I became a fan of MMA around 2004 when The Ultimate Fighter was starting. I just sort of was watching the show. I got really interested in it. I used to be a pro wrestling fan growing up, so I don't know if that was part of the reason that maybe I got into watching the UFC. And then it wasn't until about 2008 that I became involved in working in the industry. I was living in Toronto, Canada at the time, and I ended up interning at Fight Network, which still exists, but they don't really cover MMA anymore. But back then I was working there as an editor, and then I sort of moved my way up and everything. And then basically since then, I've just been involved in the television industry for a while, and I was sort of freelancing MMA on the side. And then fast forward to October of 2017, I became a dad. And obviously I couldn't do both, having a day job and covering MMA on the side. So I quit my day job and went full time as a freelancer and just did that. And yeah, I don't know. I really love the sport. So I love it. I like doing interviews. And so that's sort of how I ended up getting involved in the sport.
Can you please elaborate your life story when it comes to companies changing? You know, you said from 2004, so 2007. So can you just continue with companies, which is
Yes, absolutely. So I didn't actually start working in the industry until, like I mentioned, 2008 when I was at Fight Network. I was an editor and reporter, and I did a bunch of different stuff over there, and it was a great job. It was excellent. But the pay wasn't great, and living in Toronto was expensive, so I ended up moving over to TSN, which is like the ESPN of Canada. I ended up working as an editor there. And then I was still doing some MMA stuff on the side. I would write, I would do, a few, like a podcast, things like that. And so as I went on in my career, I basically just had a day job and I was doing this on the side. And it wasn't until about 2013 that I started doing video interviews where I just interview all types of fighters, not just UFC, but prospects and up and comers. And I was doing that for a site called MMA Oddsbreaker. And I just sort of ran with it, and I just sort of became the guy who interviewed a lot of fighters, kind of like what you're doing now. And I was doing that, back in 2013, and it got to the point where, I was doing that on the side, and everything was good. And like I said, when October 2017 came around, I couldn't do both because I had to be a dad and I had to, make time for my family. Because what I was doing basically before was I'd work my day job 9 to 5, and then after that I'd come home and do fighter interviews. I do that on the side, but I obviously couldn't do that once I became a dad. So quit my day job, ended up working for a couple different outlets back then. I think back when I quit, I was working for who's I working for? Fansided. I was working for MMA Oddsbreaker. I was working for Flow Combat. I was working for Fightful. And who else? There's a few others, but it's a couple of years ago, so I can't remember exactly. But I basically worked for enough outlets where I could make a full-time salary. So I ended up doing that up until May of 2019, and that's when the Score came along. They said they were interested in getting back into MMA coverage. They had a senior MMA news editor position, and they were interested in having me come on. And I accepted the position, and it was great. And for about a good year, I was going to events. I was covering them on site and everything. And it was great. And I'm really proud of the work I did. A lot of people would be upset of getting let go from their job, but I'm happy with the work I did. We did 24,000 subscribers on the channel, over 10 million views in just over a year. I was really happy with the work we did. And yeah, so now, unfortunately, like I said, I'm no longer in that position, and I'm back to being a full-time freelancer, just working for a couple of different outlets and just doing interview content and all that. So I think that answered your question, hopefully.
I assume your most challenging interview, well, let me guess, the one with Adesanya was very, very hard. So which one most challenging for you?
No, I don't. Israel is actually one of the easier fighters to interview because he's very personable. You say a question, you're going to get a long answer. It's great. There's been a few. The most challenging interview by far, and I'm sure you're aware of him. Maybe you're not, but if you're not, Charles Felony Bennett, also known as Charles Crazy
I
Horse Bennett,
saw
used to
him.
fight in
I
Pride.
saw it.
So I had to interview him a couple of years ago when he was fighting on that Cam Soda card in Florida, and that guy would not answer any of my questions. He was just going off on tangents. He started talking about all the criminal activity he was doing. So I'm trying to do this interview and trying to keep a straight face, but at the same time, he's saying all this ridiculous stuff. So that was difficult just because, like, he literally was not listening to any of my questions, and I'm trying to keep things professional. He's saying stuff about beating up women and all these things. Like, it was tough. So that by far was the toughest, but we got through it. We did the interview, and I hopefully got some good insight into his preparations leading into that fight.
How did you come to the idea to film so many editorial tutorials, educational tutorials about how to interview fighters and so on? How did you get an inspiration? How did you discover such a great way to film the interviews? Because to be honest, according to your rules, I basically respect all of them except one. I can't be 100% professional because that's just me, I'm from Bulgaria and we are two big fans, that's the only problem, but I respect all of them. So how did you come to that?
Well, let me answer that second part of that, which is, look, they're suggestions. I'm not saying it's the actual blueprint of what you need to do, but what was happening was over the years, at least when I started doing video interviews, there weren't a lot of people doing them. I mean, there was maybe a handful. I think Frank Trigg, Karen Bryant, there was a few other people doing video interviews. So I had to figure out how to do this all on my own. And I have an editing background, working in television. And so I was pretty familiar about editing video. And, I sort of had to figure out how to shoot video. But anyways, what ended up happening was as I went on and as I was doing more interviews and I was getting more, eventually when I went full time, I had a lot of people asking me questions. How do you do this? How do you record your interviews? So it was getting to the point where I was having to answer all these questions. And I thought, you know what? It's probably just easier if I just make a video on this. That way it's not me having to repeat myself over and over again. Not only that, but as you know, if you monetize content on YouTube, you make a little bit of money. So there's a little bit more incentive. So I just thought of things that I always had questions to, and I thought I'd just make videos on it. And so now when people ask me questions, rather than writing out a long paragraph, I can just send them the video. And I always say if they have any further questions, they can get in touch with me. But there's no blueprint on how to cover the sport. There's no blueprint on how to be a successful journalist in this sport. I don't have all the answers, but I decided to share some of my knowledge of things that I've learned over the years. So that's what prompted me to do it.
Yeah, and basically the only difference between you and me, because I don't like to put myself to the fore, as well as you have probably noticed.
What do you mean put yourself to the floor?
Well, I'm like, all right, fighter is, in the background, and I'm small guy,
Oh, I see. Well, the reason I do that is because, I think if you want to be successful in this industry, you got to build up a brand. I think people are familiar with your channel, and I think that's great. But, people got to know who you are personally. And I think, if you can, like, here's a good example. So, I'm not at the Score anymore, but I haven't really lost a lot of my audience because I don't think people tuned into the Score. They tuned into me to do my interviews because they knew what to expect. So I think I've established a good brand for myself on social media, on YouTube and everything. So the brand's important. So that's why, I don't, even though the focus should always be on the fighter, that's why people should be watching it. I think it's good to establish a brand with yourself as well, just so that way people know what to expect, when you're doing your interviews. And it's easier to find your interviews, right? Like they know, like, hey, this person does good interviews with this fighter. I can look that person up. So that's sort of why I really, I wanted to make sure that I was prominent in the videos.
I picked career areas, you know why? The reason is I'm a fan of this sport since 1993, and I literally watched every single card. I mean, we didn't have it live in the beginning, but then when we got live in 2007, I literally watched every single card. I was waking up in the middle of the night and I said, all right, I'm obsessed with history, so that's why the reason why I picked it. Did fans give you a nickname?
Fans? No, I don't have any nicknames. I'm James Lynch. That's it.
Well, I got my nickname from the fans, so that's the reason why I'm asking you. So
you're the Bulgarian cowboy. I know. I see you wear the hat and the colors and everything. That's good. That's something that there's no other Bulgarian cowboys out there covering MMA. So you're ahead of the curve.
Well, yeah, I'm the only one. I mean, there are Bulgarian commentators, journalists. There are,
but no cowboys.
But everybody do like Bulgarian or Serbian or some other language, and I'm like the only one who does it in English, so it's kind of very much unique and original. I saw in your Facebook, I saw a picture of a cat. So is this your cat or friends?
No, it's of course my cat. I think it would be kind of weird if I posed with someone else's cat. No, I have a British short hair seal point cat. So a lot of people think he's Siamese, but he's not. He's a British short hair with like the seal point colors. He's the best. He's awesome. I've had him for I think coming up to 5 years now. He's a great cat.
Well, actually, I post pictures of all the cats. I don't have my own because my flat is not big enough. And I don't want cat to suffer. But my friend, for example, has Himalayan cat. We have
Oh,
one
nice.
cat in the building. We have another cat in the building. So whenever cat sees me, they sprint to play with me. They love me. But
Well, it's
unfortunately,
funny you mentioned that because my cat, we used to live in a condo when I used to live in Toronto. So my cat was confined to this small space. And now we live in a house. I live in Vancouver now in Canada. And we have a backyard. And now the cat wants to go outside all the time now. Like it's like he's been liberated because he was just stuck in this small condo before and just having to make do with the space he had. But now he's got this, this house he can run around in. He can go outside. He can go after birds. That wasn't even an option before. So he's a happy cat these days.
so you want to say he is playful.
Yes, very playful. He's like I said, he's the best. He's an awesome cat. Good sidekick.
Yeah, just like the cat from my best friend. Whenever somebody comes, he wants to play all day long. So generally, would you like to add something to this interview? I mean, would you like maybe to add some suggestions? I don't know. There is probably something else you'd like to say.
I mean, whatever you guys want to talk about. I mean, I'm cool to talk about whatever. But yeah, I mean, just I don't know. What do you ask me? You're just asking me, is there anything I wanted to say, or what do you ask me here?
Well, I would like to ask you something, some your professional thoughts on my maybe interviews, channels, if you're down to talk about that. Maybe
Yeah,
that
I'm
would-
down to talk about anything. You
Yeah,
ask
go
me
for
whatever
it.
you want,
Go
I'll
for
answer
it.
it.
Go for it.
You're talking about like professional tips that I would give to people with interviews. Okay, well, yeah, just a couple things. I mean, I think when it comes to interviews, you want to know that you're the interviewer. So like you'll see, I'm wearing a collared shirt here. I'm not wearing a suit, but I'm also not wearing like a t-shirt and whatever. Like I think you got to look a little bit professional on camera, just so people. I mean, I come from a TV background, so I'm used to being professional when you're doing the interview. Research your interview. I know there's people who they'll mispronounce names. I do this sometimes too, but it's really important to make
Me
sure that
too.
you get the names right, you get the background right, all that stuff. Another tip I'd say is, just don't, especially if you're starting out, don't limit yourself to just UFC fighters. I like, one of the things I like that you do is you interview a lot of different people, and I think that's the key to success. Because a lot of people are just like, it's got to be UFC because it's got to be about the views. But there's definitely, it's a good strategy to interview a lot of different fighters because you never know where they could end up. And a lot of these guys, especially on the regional scene, a lot of fighters, they don't get a lot of exposure. So I think it's good to interview a variety of different fighters as well. And I'd say another thing too is just, just keep practicing, get those reps in. I mean, if you look at my interviews now compared to, even 5 years ago, I mean, there is improvements. And I think that's the big thing is just identifying where you need work, where you need to work on things and just try and improve off that and really just sort of build, like I said, build a brand for yourself and really get yourself out there, so to speak.
Did you learn something from your fighters, the fighters you talk to? Because I learned a lot from fighters I talk to. So is it both-sided or?
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. I think you can learn something from everyone. You learn sort of the struggles that a lot of these fighters go through, whether it's training camp, whether it's managing their money, whether it's trying to get a fight, whether it's a tough system, it's a tough sport to be a part of. I think being an MMA fighter, especially being in the UFC, I think that's the toughest road an athlete can take because the pay's not great. You don't have a lot of leverage in terms of what you can do in terms of booking fights and things like that. It's not like other sports where you have like a guaranteed salary. Like in a lot of these sports, like if you don't fight, you don't eat, so I do feel for a lot of these fighters. And I think what's so incredible is how they're able to make it work and how many sacrifices they're willing to do. Like I know a fighter who lives in an RV because she can't afford to live in a house, but she's pursuing this dream of trying to become a UFC champion. And I think that's very remarkable. And I think, I respect someone like that a lot more that's willing to chase their dreams as opposed to someone who, just takes like a government job and is unhappy with life, but they're content with the pay. I think I like people who take risks. I very much admire that.
When it comes to misspelling names, that is another common problem. For example, in Bulgarian and Serbian, we don't have some letters, and when I have to say some letters, it's kind of super hard, Your tongue, you goes like sticking, it's almost impossible. But I trained a lot. When I interviewed Wilson Hayes, he just said, all right, I came from Brazil, there are no excuses. I mean, you must learn it. And I trained a lot, but still, for example, when I had to pronounce Micah Brakefield, I had to train 20 times, like.
Yeah, no, certain fighters are harder than others. By the way, I saw you interview Micah. Micah lives like maybe 30 minutes from where I live. I know Micah quite well. Micah and I did commentary together for Rise Fighting Championship. I don't know if you knew that.
I knew you're a commentator. I'm doing for one of my bosses commentary, but I don't know how he shares what he does. I don't know. My contract just says you do commentary, you call me, and it's not your problem what I do further. So he just
Oh, well,
pays,
there you
and
go.
that's it.
Interesting. Well, there you go. But yeah, it's like I said, I think it's so cool to see some of the fighters you interview. I think is very interesting because like I'm from Canada, so it's cool to see you interview a lot of Canadians, which I think is great. That also need more exposure.
Well, to be honest, when it comes to Canadians, I have to share a very interesting story because, people in my country are pretty much narrow-minded. In the beginning, they were just saying that I'm not gonna succeed or so, and then they said there's no way you're gonna pick Canadian fighter, and I said all right, and I started searching your channel because I didn't know much of a Canadians. I knew maybe 10, and I found Julian LeBlanc. I said all right, this guy's gonna be my first one. And when Julian LeBlanc appeared on my channel, they started blocking me. They were so frustrated. They started blocking me. They started, made a tons of mess. But it was funny actually. It was funny to me because nobody from my state has ever interviewed a Canadian fighter. So,
There you go. That puts you in a
picked,
class of your own.
yeah, but I picked Julian LeBlanc because he's from Quebec, and it's kind of French is from Europe, and that's the reason why I wanted. They speak French, so. I don't know. You used some similar strategies in the beginning, or?
In terms of what, like reaching out to fighters,
Yes.
or? Yeah, I think a lot of what I still, what I did in the beginning, I still do now. I changed my approach a little bit in terms of, just how I go about, getting interviews. I work with a lot of managers. I try and go for bigger names now. I mean, before it was kind of like, I don't know if I'll get them, but now I'll try and get anyone if I can. I mean, you might as well try and see what you can get. I think I've done enough work in this industry where, I can get bigger guests. So yeah, I think there's some stuff that's the same, but there's some stuff that's different. I've found things that work a little bit better. Like even like small things. Like I remember I used to, whenever I'd set up like a Skype interview, I'd always just tell the fighter like, hey, just go download the Skype app and here's my Skype name. But now I figured out that you can just send them a link and it'll do it all for them, and you can automatically get added to their Skype. So that's like one little thing that I've changed over the years.
I assume you haven't watched my trainings, or?
I've watched them. Yeah, you do the shadow boxing and all that stuff for like 30 minutes. I watch all your stuff, man. I'm well educated.
So can you pinpoint to my main discipline where I come from?
Well, I think in terms of your main discipline, that I don't know, but I've just because I haven't really looked in depth, but I'll watch a few clips here and there. I sort of see you, like I said, doing the shadow boxing. It's not Muay Thai, is it? Because I don't notice you do some like what's your background then? Let's hear it.
My background is Taekwondo. I'm a Taekwondo kickboxer. I competed a lot, and with those kicks, with those insane strikes, you saw in basic Taekwondo, you have Superman punch, which is prohibited in the competition, but we don't do it like, with your leg going backward, no, but we just do like this, very short, and we have kind of very much different, so it's kind of modified Taekwondo, but, I can spin, I can do many stuff, and, I believe it's kind of an advantage, because, don't take this offensively, but 95% of journalists don't know to fight, let's be honest.
Oh no, of course not. I mean, I don't have a martial arts background. I'll admittedly, say that, but what I always say is that like I'm not a technical analyst. Like if I was, then absolutely you could, and I think if you are an analyst, you should have some martial arts training. You should have that background. But at the same time, that's like saying, hey, we're gonna get a fighter to interview people. Like there's a certain skill to interviewing. I have a journalism background. I have a communications background. I'm comfortable talking on camera. Some people aren't. So I think that's where like mostly what I do is interviews, and I think if you have a general understanding of the sport, if you watch it enough, I think you can do that job no problem. But yeah, I'm with you. Like obviously, and especially like I just started doing commentary a little while ago. I've been forced now to get a little bit more technical, learn more sort of the techniques and things like that. So I'm sort of being forced to do it. But I don't have an issue when people say you should train. But I think that should be more for analysts as opposed to actual interviewers, because I think you can interview someone and it takes a different skill set than it would be to be an analyst.
I watched a lot of interviews and I've noticed that you talk pretty much well, that you're pretty much relaxed, you have the greatest qualities, And when I kicked off with the commentary, my boss just said, alright, let you comment one fight, let's see what's going to happen. And I was saying, please don't go to the ground. I have BJJ, but I'm not BJJ expert, I was just saying, please don't go to the ground. 15 seconds, takedown. I was just, oh no, man. I was just, oh,
They should have a color. I mean, that's what the color commentator is supposed to be. Like if you look at like John Anik and Joe Rogan, like Rogan's the technical guy, Anik's sort of the guy that leads the ship, that cuts to commercial break, things like that. So there's certainly a role for both people. Like when I do commentary, I'm the lead guy, so I do all the the stats and all that stuff, and I announce the fighters and all that. But I have someone when I'm there that can do that technical analysis. Where if the fight does go to the ground, or let's say I'll even have a question during the fight, like is his arm in trouble there? Is he susceptible to the submission? I'll have a fighter there with me on color commentary that can give me that answer. So that's why you have to have both. If you had just one commentator, it would be difficult, right?
Yeah, I know, it would have been very difficult actually, and my boss was just, alright, you're gonna pick the technical part or so, and the first fight I was pleased because it was background, I'm good on the ground, but not the best. But the next fight, I'll never forget that fight. It was Muslim Salikov against, I can't remember the other, but Muslim Salikov was standing all the time. 3 rounds he was standing. They are standing and banging, and I didn't make a single mistake. And he was like, hey, you're for stand-up expert. He said, you're the best for the stand-up expert. I said, alright. And he said, you just do technical.
There you go. Well, that's I mean, I think because you have that martial arts background, it helps you, obviously pick out things that other people wouldn't, like me.
Yeah, Muslim Salikov was generally, he has very similar fighting style like me. He also has some taekwondo strikes or so, and it was like I'm watching myself, So basically, when you do commentary, you also have another commentator with you, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's a 2-man booth. Actually, the last 2 shows we've done, we've had 3-man booths, and it's worked out great.
3?
Yeah, we had 3 commentators in the booth. So I don't know why. I guess they just wanted to do it that way. I mean, the UFC does that too. They'll have 3 people on commentary as well. So yeah, I guess they just felt it was good, and it seemed to work out last time. But Micah was one of them who you just interviewed. He was someone that was doing commentary as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this. And about your interviews, I watched a lot of interviews on YouTube, but generally your questions are kind of more, more oriented towards the background, the fighter, the events, the happenings, and I pretty much liked your style. I don't know how you share styles or so. I don't know how do you do that, but I mean, I like your interviews. I like what I see. I don't know, not much, Whenever I watch your interview, I think, alright, I know what's gonna happen next, if you understand me.
Yeah, I have sort of a formula, but I think that's like I like keeping my interviews a little bit shorter. I like getting to the point. I like finding the question. Like I always think of myself when I'm doing the interviews as like as a fan, what would I like to know about this fighter heading into their fight? So there are a lot of stuff that I'll ask, like the opponent matchup. What do you think of the style matchup? How's the weight cut going? You got to ask those general questions, and then I'll throw in some other ones as well. But I don't like my style personally is I like to get to the point. I don't like having long-winded questions. I like saying as much as possible in the fewest amount of words. And I also like letting the fighter talk. I know a lot of people interrupt. Sometimes I do interrupt fighters. It's because you want to make it more of a conversation. But in general, my style has just been to the point. Let's get the questions we need answered. Let's throw a couple fun questions in. But the main thing is just delivering the best amount of content in the shortest period of time. That's sort of how I like doing it.
Well, you're doing it pretty much well, and I haven't seen you interrupting fighters so much, and to be honest, I hate when somebody does it, then I can't watch the interview. When he interrupts all the time, it's kind of boring to me. I don't know, maybe audience thinks different, but to me it's very boring to watch, because I came to watch the fighter, of course, but I'm watching every single of your interview.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I would hope so. If you're going to have me on, I would hope that you like watching my stuff. Otherwise, that would be a pretty bad interview if you didn't like what I was doing. But no, I appreciate that, man. I've been doing it for a while. I'm really lucky to be, doing this as for a living, being able to talk to fighters. And it's, right now times are a little tough just because, like I said, I'm having to readjust and basically try and find enough work to make like a full-time salary. But at the moment we're recording this, but no, I mean it's a very unpredictable industry, and it's a lot of fun. That's the biggest thing. Like I couldn't imagine doing anything else right now.
Yeah, thank you a lot for this one. Would you like maybe to add something or?
Sure. You guys can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. That's if you guys have any questions, I'm very easy to get a hold of. You know this. I know you've messaged me before. I'm very accessible. My YouTube channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports. You'll find a lot of my content there, but a lot of the stuff I'll be doing will be for different outlets. So I'll put those interviews in playlists on my channel, but they won't actually live on there. So keep your eyes out for that. And thanks for having me on, man. And anytime you want me on, let me know. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. I will now start creating video, but I must train later, and so early morning tomorrow I hope it will be finished. Camtasia Studio takes some time.
No worries. I appreciate you having me on, man. And thanks, and I'm glad this all worked out with the timing and everything. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. I'll start creating video now.
See ya. Take it easy.